Hello everyone, this is Yahweh. I am recording this for you on the planet you refer to as Nibiru. I am right now in... The planet itself is much larger by several times than Delta Sol, but I'm in the capital city, you would say. The City of Ones would be the translation. In a library. I've been spending a lot of time reading, kind of catching up, if you will, and moreover, looking for further explanation of some of the things that have been puzzling me over the years that I've spent on your planet. And one of the big things that I wanted to find out was more about the transition between the age of the fourth sun, the previous age of Jakku on Delta Sol, and the fifth age, the one in which you live presently. The age of the fourth sun on Delta Sol was, in the end, ruled by a queen. Tamalia, or Tiamalia, is the loose translation that I would throw out. Based on what I read, sounds to me like a very interesting woman, one who was very much in touch or in tune with the balance of your planet in a physical form. This part doesn't make a lot of sense to me because the records speak as if I assume, or excuse me, as if it assumes I know, as the reader, kind of some of the backstory that I'm unfamiliar with, and I'll try to find more out. But the basis of this story is at the end of the fourth age, the queen had grown old, this Tamalia, and she had two sons, Cheyenne, who was the older, kind of seemed like a little darker individual, and then Lohare, or Lo-Are, maybe would be the translation, younger by a couple of years. So Cheyenne and Lo-Are were the ones that had to inherit this, I don't know what you would call it, a gift, a skill, this learned form of both wisdom and ritual that kept the earth in balance. Now, one thing that caught my attention is the word Gaia, which is a word that I've heard in 20th century Jakku, normal modern lexicon, referred to as Mother Earth. They lived in a city, the capital city at the time. This is the way I understand and what I'm reading. Tamalia or Tiamalia governed your entire planet from her throne. It seemed like it was kind of a benevolent rule. The stuff that I read spoke of a lot of art and culture, music, what would be the equivalent of theater, I guess, or acted out art. The temple there was called the Temple of Ra. That would be the translation that I would give to it, and I believe I would be very accurate. That ties into a lot of the mythology that I'd read, very similar to that of the ancient Egyptians. The area of this city would have been near modern day, I'm trying to draw from memory, I think it's called Matak. It's an island in the South China Sea, Indonesia. There's a city there, Siantan, something like that. It's high now. It's still above the water. During the end of the fourth age, during the fourth age, sea level on Delta Sol much lower than it is today in present day time. The climatic change that ultimately ended the fourth age of the Jakku on Delta Sol came when the queen began to fall ill. Her physiology was tied in some way to that of the earth. It had been passed down, and it was traditionally always passed down to the firstborn daughter. A matriarchal society built upon, like I said, a lot of art and culture and beauty. Very interesting in my reading to kind of discover they believed that the afterlife was merely a progression, something that could be understood, comprehended, and mastered so that one was ready for that next step beyond the existence in which you're living currently. I myself don't really believe much of that kind of ideology. I believe that if it was possible for us as physical beings to pull back the veil of the spirit world, we wouldn't know what we were looking at for the most part. However, I do have the utmost respect for this type of culture, this shamanism, this ability of a human or another type of being to allow one's physical self to become in harmony, in sync with that which is around them. And I don't doubt that this symbiotic relationship could become very powerful. And I don't know how that could influence an entire planet's ecosystem, but somehow it did. So as the queen grew ill, the planet began self-destructing. Neither of the sons seemed to be able to master these skills their mother possessed, these talents, this set of wisdoms that allowed her to balance the many forces of Mother Nature, you might say. She was dying. Neither son could really take on these powers. They began fighting amongst themselves, and there are a lot of parallels in this story with that of the old story in Judeo-Christian cultures of Cain and Abel. These brothers who fought until one killed the other and created sin amongst the Jakku. I'm here to tell you that sin has been around since the beginning, literally, of time, I believe. So began the age of the fifth son. What has gone down in record is the beginning of the age of the fifth son of Delta Sol, with Cheyenne and Lohare vying for power and creating a dichotomy on the earth. Both of them seem to have retained parts of their mother's wisdoms. They each were able to exercise some control over certain elements. And they went opposite directions, one to what would now be the eastern hemisphere and one to the west. Cheyenne to the western hemisphere, and Lohare to the eastern hemisphere. From there, and they weren't the only ones that survived this chaotic disruption. There were many who survived, but one of the most noticeable effects was what would now be considered hurricanes, or called hurricanes or typhoons. these became very prevalent, and in the records that I read, these storms lasted for months in the atmosphere of Earth, traveled thousands of miles, wreaking havoc. This went on for... It's difficult to determine when you're reading these ancient texts a timeline. First of all, the dates that I would understand, just from my personal experience, wouldn't make a lot of sense to you, my friends there on Delta Sol that are going to be listening to this. So in my mind, as I read through these, I try to interpret the data and figure out the approximate equivalent in Earth time. The end of the fourth age of man, and the beginning of the fifth, took place about 14,000 Earth years ago. These cultures began developing throughout the world as the turmoil settled down. And by my reading and my understanding, it looks like it might have been maybe a period of 50 years, perhaps 100, perhaps on the small side, a decade, 10. But I do know that in what I have read, there were several societies that were able to retain some form of order and carry on. There were societies in the Indus Valley. There were societies in Egypt. There were societies in South America, North America, all around the globe. And this is where the record gets sketchy, because from there it kind of fizzles into what we understand as modern prehistory on Delta Sol. The stories we're all familiar with, the ancient Egyptians, etc. And would be a great topic of conversation for one of these recordings, but I kind of want to talk about, if I could, I hope, we wanted to make these tapes special. We wanted to make, and when I say we, I mean me and mostly John, that some of you might still call Vince. Because we've been doing the tapes for a while, and then everything changed with me getting let go, you might say, discharged of my duties. But it's given me a lot of freedom. If any of you are curious as to how I'm doing very well. I honestly am. I feel empowered. I feel adventurous. I feel alive. And I feel freer than I have in a very long time to express what I really truly feel without the constructs of my mission. I was always had to be very careful before of not naming names and things like that. And, people want to know about your myth about the Antichrist. I can tell you several that match the description, but, in Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is a very interesting individual who, right now, I don't know what's going on exactly, but when I left, he and in particular his chief of staff are in hot water with the Ayatollahs, and they are both very powerful, very dangerous men. And both of them very much, I believe, fit the description in your mythology. You must understand, this is Christian mythology especially is not part of my personal belief constructs. Yeshua once told me that he tried his best, basically, to preach love and forgiveness and positivity, and that people would instantly, sometimes, misinterpret what he said and use it for their own gain or their own justifications. And very difficult for him sometimes, I think, to understand what has happened in his name. A lot of good has happened in his name, don't get me wrong. But my experience is more in, I guess, spirituality. And I say that because I have always been interested in the souls of not just the Jakku, but in every species I study, every race throughout the galaxy that I've had the opportunity to spend time with. I'm interested in how similar all of our souls seem to be. It's a unique topic of conversation. Here on Nibiru, it's a bustling planet. It's very busy. The culture is very rigid, I guess you would say. There is not a lot of free creative expression. The order is very much you're reminded of it constantly. You're constantly given instruction verbally with signs, everything, what to do, where to be at what time. But it is a very organized society that is all but free of what you would consider crime. Very pleasant place to be. It's full of ancient history, and it always bothers me when I hear the Anunnaki referred to as reptilian, that they're some kind of lizard. My friends, the Anunnaki are not bird gods. They're not... I got after Vince once for in one of his videos putting this... It's a common picture of a Sumerian tablet that it's the one you always hear people say, those who from the heavens came, the Anunnaki, and kind of a bird/reptile-looking being. That was an artistic representation of what they had seen. That was not realism. That was expressionism, or perhaps abstract. The Anunnaki, is in physical appearance, look very much like you Jakku, like me, like the Arcturians, the Lemurians. And there's the only ones in the mix that really we would consider, I guess, in a humanoid form that very much look different are the Greys. And that's why I'm very much looking forward to my trip to Zeta Reticuli. I want to find out what's going on with them. I want to find out why so many Jakku that I have known and been close to over the years on your planet have had such negative experiences with the Greys. Why? I plan on asking some very frank questions. I don't know what I'll be able to bring back from these trips, to be honest. I'd like to bring back something, but I'm being closely guarded. I guess you'd call them minders, would be the English word equivalent. I'm being watched. These tapes are a perfect cover because the way John set it up with this, I don't know, various track machine, multiple track machine, whatever he calls them, loaded with his music, I have already shown several people. And it's very fun to kind of share that little bit of Jakku culture. Of course, I've got other music with me as well. I brought a lot of John Coltrane, which I have just absolutely been delighting in during the time I've been traveling in transit. Listened to a lot of Miles Davis, some Robert Johnson, Bob Dylan. I'm kind of getting tired of the group, the Beatles, not because they're not excellent musicians, but just because I've heard, I think, all of their songs 3,000 times. And of course, Jimmy, whom I will never forget and hope to one day see again. But on Nibiru, there's a lot of talk about Delta Soul, about this coming assimilation. They're going to be passing by your planet very soon. Many of you who know where to look can see Nibiru from in your southern sky, near sundown, sunset, and sunrise, when the light is refracting refracting, excuse me, in your atmosphere that gives you kind of, as when you can see the other planets lining up. There's a time right before the dark of night or the light of day, that kind of intermittent few moments where you can see very far off into the heavens. And those who knew where to look, you can see Nibiru. Look to the south. If you're in the northern hemisphere of Delta Sol, you're probably not going to be able to see very much. But if you're in the southern hemisphere, that's where you would want to be looking. The South Pole Observatory has been tracking it, of course, for years, but that information now has been taken down, as I understand it. On Nibiru here, there is a thing. It's very similar to what you would call your internet. They don't use computers. They might be computers. I don't. Please, I don't understand anything about modern technology here, your place, anywhere. Most of it absolutely befuddles me. The technology that's used on Nibiru, there are screens that are similar to very small computers that people carry around with them. I don't know what they're called. But it is connected to something similar to that, and they are given media, news, what would be the equivalent of news and information and entertainment here throughout this network. But it is controlled by the 7th Emperor of Nibiru. And while you're here, you have to be very careful how you refer to the Emperor. He and I happen to be somewhat friends. I cannot speak of him in an informal fashion, or I'm liable to find myself in the equivalent of a prison or jail cell, which would be a very unpleasant experience, from my understanding here. This rigid society does not take kindly to any kind of disruption or disorder. The water here, and yes, I am drinking Kool-Aid. Ice is very difficult to come by. The process they use to make ice here, the Anunnaki, they don't have a lot of cool things, cool foods, cool beverages here. And I very much like cool, refreshing beverages, which might be unusual for an individual who's always cold. But here I'm not. Here the gold, I don't know how they do it, but they take gold and put it into almost, I guess, a molecular size, just dispersed in the atmosphere. It gives you, when you first get here, an overwhelming feeling of just almost vertigo, euphoric vertigo, but vertigo. And there really isn't a day or a night here. The planet itself is the gold in the atmosphere that's dispersed throughout the atmosphere acts as both a shield when it's close to the sun like it is now. You would not believe how close we are to the sun. It is very large in the sky. However, there's no radiation. We're not being burnt. The temperature is comfortable to me. I don't know what the centigrade or Fahrenheit equivalent would be. But if I were to guess, I'm not even going to guess. It reminds me very much of a warm tropical climate. It's just very warm and almost moist feeling day and night. Not unpleasant though. It's not overly humid, but it's always bright here. And the way the Anunnaki sleep, or the way that, because I realize that might sound, how would you have a biological clock functioning, is that they all meditate. The Anunnaki have, they're taught chants from childhood that put them into a very deep trance. And one of the most interesting things that I've always found, and I've spent a lot of time on Nibiru, is that the Anunnaki have a very easy time for some, I guess I shouldn't say for some reason, it's because they're taught this from a young age, but they really spend a lot of time in the Akashic record. It's what I've worked a lot with John with. It's what I hope to work with each one of you on an individual basis with, this exploration of dream time. It's an amazing thing. Your minds are capable of understanding so much, of seeing so much. You might think of that as something like an astral projection, something similar. I assure you, my friends, that's not what I'm referring to. These are real experiences that I'm referring to. Difficult to describe, because unless you've been there and seen it, it's very difficult to put that into words. But in the coming year, and whatever else time I've got left on Delta Soul with you, I plan on reaching out to all of the friends I have there, and each of the individuals who are in the vault, and who order these tapes through John's company. But moving on, one of the most interesting things I studied on Nibiru when I was here at university was ancient symbolisms. And these are some of the things that I am going to be writing on these discs. I'm going to bring these recorders back, and I'm going to write on the covers that I've asked John to create for me. And each one of you are going to get different messages, and each one of you are going to get different numbers. And it's going to be very important for you to be open to the possibility that I may freak you out at times. I may say things that make you uncomfortable. I may say things that contradict what you've learned before. And I don't ask you to take my word for it. I ask you just simply to consider what I have to say, okay, going forward, because some of it's going to be quite controversial. For instance, the United Nations back there on Earth, a completely impotent body with no real regulatory enforcement capability, other than passing these meaningless, word-ridden resolutions that do nothing. As we saw back in the 90s, and then again in the early 2000s, the UN resolutions are enforced seemingly at random by choice, whatever works. And the world powers right now are shifting very much away from the United States as both a currency. The countries that use the United States dollar to trade oil, OPEC, they're looking at different types of currencies. And one of the big ideas that's being proffered is this idea of a global currency for the Jakku, for Delta Sol. And this is being brought to you by descendants, direct descendants of these two sons of this queen. I'm not going to spend the time reading off all the names, because that's ridiculous. These names make no sense to me. They would probably make less sense, to you. And it would take me the rest of this tape to try to translate them. But you can see the lineage. It's drawn out. It's like a family tree. They have retained banking power for centuries, millennia, really. It's amazing. Through different forms of mainly the distribution, the collection, hoarding, cataloging, keeping, stockpiling of gold, among other precious metals, but mainly gold. And then keeping the Jakku convinced that it was the most precious metal imaginable, something of value to pursue. And then in the modern era, with the Knights Templar and the Crusades creating the modern-day banking system because they couldn't carry these giant chests of gold with them throughout Europe down into the Holy Land and back, and to have a way to stop off along the way and make a deposit and a withdrawal. And all these things have been carried on throughout the ages, and now what's being offered is a global currency. And the United States, when it was started for kind of to break free. Again, these two warring factions that have been kind of at odds with each other for 14,000 of your Earth years, that are in one way or another direct descendants of these two brothers. Now, again, that's not to say that everyone on Earth is a descendant of these two brothers. I'm not speaking of the biblical Genesis, the book of the Genesis, however it's said. What I'm talking about is that these two spawned very productive, wealthy families that have stood the test of time. There have been others who have been introduced to the good life, the world of your Jacu money, your currency that I'm sorry to say to some of you who value it so much will be completely worthless in a few years. And stockpiling your gold won't do you any better. And you don't need to spend your money on canned food and bottled water for an apocalypse. What you need to do is get your souls together. Your Earth is going to go through some dramatic changes over the next 18 months in your time. You need to get everybody you can, however many billion of you there are now, in unison trying to balance the energies, because you can control them. Of course, I've been telling Jacu for years that they can become gods. Yes, I say that all the time. You have everything within you that your God does. All that potential, that creativity. Do you not imagine? Do you not have creative thought? Do you not create something in your mind? You think about it, and you strive to create that perhaps in a physical sense through words or art, painting, sculpture, working with wood or glass or ceramic, any kind of creative expression is very close. I believe, this is just my belief. Please, I don't intend to try to start a religion here. But it's very much that's my belief, that's what brings us closer to God. That's what brings us closer to what God must feel like. That creative, euphoric feeling of, this is mine, this is my creation. And some we share and some we don't. I'm a creative person, I guess, in that I do. I like to find things out about the cultures I'm studying and the individuals I'm spending time with. And then I try to look deep within what I call the Akashic Record. That's an Earth equivalent. When I do the next tape from Abanya, I'm going to have to remember to get into that a little bit, because that's really where I learned all this. And I wanted to talk exclusively about Nibiru. The Sumerians, back in the ancient times, the Sumerians were very concerned about flooding. A lot of societies were, because during the Fourth Age, that's what happened. You had a much lower sea level than what you have right now today. Many societies were making contingency plans in ancient times for the second coming of this deluge that had wiped everyone out, or so many people out. So they began building sanctuaries and high places. And one of them, in what is now modern day Afghanistan, is right now the subject of a very large war going on. There have been a lot of excuses over the years. The Russians and the United States have come up with various reasons as to why they needed to be involved in that unfortunate country. I say that because they've been at perpetual war for so long. And the people, some of them are very interested in protecting these ancient secrets that exist in these hills. And one of these devices, I've spoke of this before, is rather like almost like a thermostat for your planet. At least that was what was believed. The power that you use right now, modern day electricity, alternating and direct current, it's fascinating. It's brilliant technology, really, especially the distribution, the redundancy, the network that's been created in the Western world to make your society so dependent upon it. It's a feat of technology. But there are much more efficient forms of generating power. And one of those is crystalline in nature. Crystals are unique in that they are able to form containing rigid patterns that can be read and interpreted. And they can also store light, I guess would be the way to term it. The energy associated with light, at least, which travels very quickly, as we all know. It makes for a very efficient form of information preservation and later bringing that back up in a useful form. I don't know what I'm trying to say with that. I just know that there are places around the earth right now that are becoming contested by the various powers that be on your planet. And it'll be interesting when I get back to see what I'm able to do in influencing the outcome of these battles, because that's really what they are. You know, in Iran, with that virus that was released on their computer network, if that doesn't interest you, then I'm sorry, you've been asleep or something. That's modern day warfare, my friends. That is the warfare of your 21st century, right there in action. The beginnings of it. A malicious computer program that targets some certain component. It's run by a very small, seemingly simple computer. Not a computer like you would be using to interact with your friends or go on your internet, but zeros and ones nonetheless. It's a form of data that's very easily corrupted, very easily lost. I've spoke of that before too. The Kool-Aid supply is well stocked, but I worry about it running low on this trip. The food, if you're curious about the food on Nibiru, they have a very varied diet here. The animals that they use for meat are very similar to the animals on Earth, save pigs. The Earth is the only planet I've ever come across that eats this type of animal. An animal that spends much time eating food that is buried within its own feces. And, ugh, I'm making myself gag. I know that John at least enjoys meat. I've known a lot of people in my time here and elsewhere that have been what you would consider a vegetarian. On Nibiru, what they do is the food is all grown in a very small, by comparison, a very small area of the planet. All of it. They're very efficient farmers, you would call them. But I don't know what exactly it is they put in this soil, but the crops are just bountiful everywhere in these areas that are designated specifically for agriculture. The main animal that they use for meat and for animal products is very similar to bovine, to a cattle on Earth. And then they have a bird that's similar to a large turkey. I think there's not an ostrich. There's another type of bird. An emu, I think, is the English word for it. Anyway, a very large bird that's grown for its meat. And their methods of slaughtering for meat seem very humane in nature to me. It reminds me very much of, in Judaism, the kosher ritual of taking an animal's life and preparing it for human consumption. But I digress. Some information that will make it worth your while for spending what we're going to ask you to spend to buy these CDs. Something that you're going to want to be aware of is that I'm going to start with the help of those who will help me. Broadcasting probably on YouTube, back on Delta Soul. Because, the interesting thing about YouTube is that it works in almost all countries. Even North Korea. When I was in North Korea, we were watching YouTube. They said they used it to watch, movie previews, to see what movies they wanted to download. Of course, the area that I was in was outside the scope of, Pyongyang's direct control, let's say. But I want to start putting out coded messages, guys. Coded messages that you will understand, because I'm going to give you this key to understand them. But I want to create a network of Jakku around the planet, around Delta Soul, that can work with me directly on projects. I'm not talking about, nothing bad. I'm certainly not speaking about anything that would cause you or anyone else any kind of harm. I'm talking about things to help people. Here's why. I honestly believe that the time has come for the human race to become part of this galactic community. And I believe that the human race, for the most part, is very ready for what's next. But they need, a lot of people need that little push over into the consciousness that we enjoy. Now, how are we going to do this? With coded messages, much less. Well, here's my plan. I think that people are naturally fascinated by puzzles and trying to figure out things they don't know. Finding order in chaos, meaning in things that may seem random. And these messages that I want to start putting out when I get back will very much have definite meaning and definite purpose. And you will know what they are. And I want you, if you're interested, to begin helping me spread these messages. Because if they come from me, if I just say the words, what do I say next? If I just say the words, it's not going to have the same intrigue. It's not going to have the same, intrigue, I guess. Maybe I should go back and rewind this. When I left, John says, push this button, push this button, do this, and then don't do anything else until you're ready to stop. And then push the stop button, which is the square. And that's what I'm going to try to do, because I don't want to screw these up. I want to change the world. I want to change the planet Earth. I do want to go back home on or near December 21st, 2012 of Jakku time. And so that gives me a limited window in which to work. And I want to know if you guys would help me. You, right now, listening to my voice. Because there won't be very many. 50 was the maximum. And I don't know how many will buy these CDs. They're going to be rather expensive. But I hope to make it worth it. Because some of the things in these messages I want to start putting out are things that I find out when I get back. I hope to find out, especially with, this HARP technology that's just gone awry. There are those amongst my peers who believe that HARP is technology that was available to previous ages of the Jakku. And that's what caused, or devices like it, or what caused some of these very, very disruptive periods in the Earth's climate. Now, I, myself, I haven't made up my mind on those theories of whether or not I believe them or not, but I'll tell you this. I certainly think that right now, this age of humans that inhabit the planet believe that they are the pinnacle of technological advancement of civilization that's ever been, are going to begin to find out that perhaps that way of thinking is incorrect. Because I honestly believe that one of the ways this disclosure that I've been talking about now for months, this rolling out of open communication and information about what you would call aliens, I believe that these ancient artifacts, these ancient records, these ancient ruins, and understanding more about them will open people's minds to the possibility that the history that you have been taught is perhaps not the entire story. And some of it is just absolutely wrong. Sorry, I hope you can't hear me taking drinks. Where I was today, I was down at, there's a part on the river, and I guess it would be the equivalent of a park, let's say, but it's a very beautiful beach, and I very much like laying in the sand. I spend a lot of time when I have time to relax and just do what I want to do, finding a beach with warm sand and laying in it, covering my body with it. The reason I do this is because it allows me to relax. It gives me this feeling of just enjoyment, of peace. And I have sand all over. I've got it in my eyes, I've got it in my ears. And it was a beautiful day to do that. And it just made me start thinking about some of the stories that I wanted to tell on this tape. And I'm going to try to tell as many as I can in the time that I have left. The first story that I want to tell, that I want everyone to know, is that during the 80s and the 90s, when I did a lot of work with especially the NSA in the United States, and a lot of work with the Mossad in Israel. Those are agencies that a lot of times people say bad things about. And I want it known that those individuals, by and large, believe very firmly in what they're doing. Most of them are not paid very well. They're not compensated very well, and they work very long hours. But they have uncovered this network around your planet of these very old, very wealthy families who are trying to acquire pieces of this ancient technology that they believe can manipulate the weather on your planet. And this, many of the, and when I talk about these agencies, they have hundreds, each of them, if not maybe thousands of departments, and they're very compartmentalized, and one may not know at all what the other is doing, but the few that I've spent time with seem like very good people. The Rockefeller family, the Morgan family, the Harkness family, the Vanderbilts, the Whitneys, the DuPonts, the McCormicks, the Fishers, the Guggenheims, the Fields, Duke families, the Lehmans. Well, not so much maybe. There's been a lot who have been involved in trying to procure very interesting artifacts from around the globe, or your globe. You may be interested to know that at least the Rockefellers, my understanding is that they are in the possession of a completed device. Now, when I talk about these devices, these would be things that to you would look like stones, interlocking stones, with probably strange writing on them. I'm not talking about something that you would plug into an electrical outlet and turn on. These are something that are things that are turned on by energies that are created by human beings. Human beings can channel energy. Each of you can. Most of you know how. In fact, my opinion, most of you probably just don't remember how to do it. I'm sure at times in your life there have been things that you have done that seemed beyond your normal capabilities. A burst of strength or clairvoyance, a surge of that spiritual energy. Once you feel it, you look for it, seek after it the rest of your physical existence. I don't know where specific disasters will take place. I don't have a playbook of what these people are going to try to do, but they're trying to cull your population. They're trying to thin you out to a much more manageable level. As this opportunity begins to unfold, where many of you will be able to travel off planet and see things, go places that you never imagined. These individuals on another planet, their money's no good. Okay, they can't take it with them. Their bank balances do not transfer on a galactic equivalent. And their gold, while value to the Anunnaki, simply means that they are allowed to retain the formal ruling class power on Delta Sol. The Anunnaki don't want this to happen, this population thinning. And there's a lot of very heated debate going on right now. From what I hear here, from what I understand, here in the capital, the city of the Ones is. There are a lot of people who are involved in the governance of Nibiru because it is such a rigid society. And there's a lot of open conversation, very frank conversation about, because they're very excited for what's going to happen in 2012. On December 21st, 2012, ships are not going to land on your planet. Your planet's not going to rip apart and destroy itself. You're going to wake up that day and it's not going to feel any different than any other. There may be some outages of your electrical system before, during, and after that time period. And some of them, I'm afraid, my friends, may be permanent. If I could give you one piece of advice, I would say begin to learn to exist without your electronic devices. That's why it's so important for me to do these tapes. Maybe that sounds crazy because they're coming to you on a compact disc or computer. But I want you to hear what I have to say. Some of you will remember different things. But my hope is that one day you'll be able to share something that I have told you with someone else, and that it will help them better understand what they're going to be going through as these times begin to unfold. The Anunnaki don't want you as a species to be wiped out. They don't want you killed in mass numbers. They don't want you as their slaves. They want you to branch out throughout the galaxy and begin to inhabit other what are termed M-class planets. Planets that would sustain our type of life. Are any of you curious to know if there are sentient beings who are not like us? Bipedal. A head with eyes, ears, some kind of a nose. There are. There's one that exists near the center of the galaxy. The name is very hard to translate. It would be something like Ke'ela Top. I'm going to butcher that. Ke'ela Top, I think, is probably the easiest way to interpret that. But the names aren't important. Let me tell you about them. They're a species of, maybe an equivalent would be a plant, I guess. Yes. They don't move. They don't walk around. Where they are born, that's where they stay. They grow. They live for, I don't know what the Earth equivalent would be in their time, for their cycles, as you would call it. It would be hundreds of thousands of theirs. So in Earth time, it would be, they would live for millions of years, is what I'm getting at. Anyway, they are completely telepathic. I've never had the opportunity to study anything like that, but I've read documentation in this library and others about this species. And one of the things that they talk about is how our type, our kind, came to this galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. Apparently, according to them, we are all descended from a group that left from a nearby galaxy that on Earth you call the Andromeda Galaxy. not to be confused with the planet Andromeda, but the Andromeda Galaxy, which is a neighboring galaxy to ours, to the Milky Way. When a star went supernova, I think is the word to use there, when it reached the end of its life, they had several years' notice, equivalent, and organized a mass exodus. Now, going across space, that it's different than traveling around through the galaxy, where there are stars that can guide you and give you an approximation of where you're at within the galactic plane. Traveling in open space is something that I don't know, I would not want to do it. There's a lot that can go wrong. And if you're not in an area that you can signal for help, you're done for. So this group left a very large caravan from the Andromeda Galaxy. Now this would be approximately I want to say 1 billion, and I don't know if that's accurate. It's a long time. At least a few 100 million Earth years ago this happened. And they made it. They encountered the way the story is told. They encountered nothing in this void, in this empty space. And one of the first planets that was considered for habitation was the Earth. Now, at this time on the Earth, from what I understand from the story, the Earth was very much covered with water and there was one large landmass. However, it was deemed that this large landmass was about to have a catastrophic volcanic release. A huge square area would become a release of lava. I think that's what it's called, magma. Stuff, it's hot. Comes out of volcanoes. Isn't that interesting, though, that potentially your little planet could have been one of the first settled by these new travelers? Now, they ended up in what is now called the Pleiades, or what we refer to as the Pleiades. For instance, with Ibanya, my planet, which is on the other side of the Milky Way galaxy, that must have taken, I'm trying to think of an Earth equivalent, probably 10,000 years to get that far with what they were using at the time. It was like in the days of, the older days of Earth, of your time, where colonists set out and colonized areas, except for in this instance, there were no inhabitants. Now, the native species of this galaxy is not like us. It's not bipedal. There are several, but one of them, one of the native species of our galaxy are what I call the Greys. It's my belief that the Greys are about to do something. I think they're going to do something evil. I honestly think that the Greys feel that the time is right to retake this galaxy. So those of you on Earth who are worried about becoming slaves of the Anunnaki in 2012 or something similar, that's not what's going to happen. But I think unless something is done, the people of Earth will become the subjects of the Greys. Because when Nibiru passes, the Greys will seize the opportunity to take over. Their infrastructure, as I understand it, is already in place. It's been in place for years. It began in earnest in Earth time around the 1950s. As more and more Jakku countries, military organizations began testing atomic weapons, weapons of a nuclear nature, it drew the Greys' attention. The Greys want something that is buried under the ice in Antarctica. You know, it's funny, John's book that he's writing, because I did what I could to read part of it. I'm not the best reader. It's very interesting, the part about an ancient civilization that used to inhabit Antarctica. Because I believe that's what the Greys are after. It's something buried underneath that ice. And I think that they have established, if not complete readiness, they must be very close by now to a full-fledged colony buried deep within the ice in Antarctica. My understanding, the way it works, is it's buried deep within the ice, and it has caverns that follow through from this main subterranean layer out into the Southern Ocean. And their craft can either travel underneath the waves or through the air and complete their various tasks. And a lot of what they're doing right now is they're looking for Jakku who have certain traits in what I refer to as the soul. They call it something different. And I'm going to wait until I get there and do my tape from there, till I really get into more detail about this. But this is going to be the subject of everything I do from now on. And I want to figure out how the Jakku can defend themselves against this. Because they're going to look for the most powerful souls they can find. Some of you may be candidates for what they're looking for. I don't know. What I could tell you is that the signs would be you would start to feel anxiety, I guess, unnecessary, or you would start to begin to feel nervous or paranoid at times when you would otherwise feel calm and relaxed. What they're doing when this happens is apparently there are implants placed inside of you. And I'm going to go over what I know about these in the next two of these tapes, but because this one's closing, it's getting to the end of the time. You're walking around, some of you, maybe not you exactly that are listening to this, but many, many, many humans with these small implanted devices from the Greys. The reason I know this is because being on Nibiru, the Anunnaki feel as if the Greys, it's not worth the fight with them to try to save the Earth. That's what I've found out. I think that's why I was replaced. I think Ond and his two assistants, or whatever you want to call them, are there to close up shop. I think they're there to collect what they can from these ruling families on Earth, and I don't know that they're going to have much interest in Delta Sol from this time forward, because the Greys very much want it. Now, this isn't to say that there's nothing you can do. There's a lot that can be done, and it's not just me that will be fighting against this. The Greys are going to come at you most often in your sleep. They're going to also, because of these very thin, very small, I would assume they would be considered a device they implant. In many of you, it would be right at the base of your skull, the very back of your head, where your spine, the top of your spinal column would attach to your skull. It would be a very small implant, perhaps a centimeter in length, very thin, perhaps the thickness of a human hair. This is all that's needed. It begins to influence your thought patterns. Now, Vince had one of these in his head. And I know this, I know how this may sound. His was, I guess for lack of a better term, deactivated. But he did it himself. Through some training, but he did it himself. They're looking for the strongest among you. They don't care about the powers that be and their intended disruption of your planet's biosystems. The atmospheric changes have no bearing on the Greys. They live under the ground, under the waves, under the ice. Or if they are in the terrestrial environment, they're almost exclusively always enclosed in their craft. Cloaking technology does exist. There are ways to diffract light, most often through the systems that propel these craft. Their craft alter gravity. It's very similar to when you place two magnets. You turn them around and they push against each other. Trains now all over the world are using this technology, but this is something that's universal. Polarity, positive, negative. And this repelling of gravity, this reversing of gravity's pull and turning it into a push, a controlled push, also allows them to alter how light passes through them or around them. That's very interesting in that it's a universal constant. Your scientists are right about that one. And it's a very good measurement of time because of that. And it's the standard through which galactic time is kept. You'll become very familiar with galactic time in short order, my friends. It's coming. The new age is coming. Now, the Greys are going to do everything they can to create chaos, to foment distrust among you. And I and others like me plan on fighting them. Water here on Nibiru, by the way, does not taste like water on Earth. The way I would describe it is the water always has a gritty texture. Always. And almost a sweet flavor, a salty sweet flavor. I don't know how else to describe it. It's not bad for you, or at least for me, or certainly not for the Anunnaki here. However, one of the very interesting things I find, especially in comparison with your planet, is that you can take a cup and drink from a river in the middle of the city, and it causes you no harm. Pure water is considered sacred here on Nibiru, and nothing goes into the rivers, streams, tributaries, ocean. The ocean here is vast. But that would be for another tape. And this one's almost at the end. So what can I tell you? Well, I can tell you that the Greys are going to do everything that they can to disrupt your planet's governments, the leadership structure. That will be going on at the same time when these ruling families all over Delta Sol are trying to disrupt through their own devices, these technologies, some of which they have developed and some of which they have found or pieced together to alter the natural balance of your planet. Earthquakes, floods, weather that will not make sense to you. Very unseasonable weather, let's say. Times that are usually warm will become much cooler, vice versa. Also, there will be areas around Delta Sol that will begin to experience a lot of rain, a lot of precipitation that are normally very dry, or even in some cases devoid of a lot of precipitation. I'm talking about deserts. These areas are going to be in particular flux because the ground is just not used to absorbing that much moisture. And it creates, if you can imagine the weight of water spread out over, hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers, it's a lot of weight pushing down on faults within the earth. Now, the powers that be on your planet believe that they can aim this technology. And that's what I plan on providing you. When I get back, I'm going to find out. I'm going to figure out a way to find out what they're doing, when, where. And I'm going to begin broadcasting this. Now, I can't just come out and say it. Do you realize they would just kill me? They would find me and kill me. I am no longer going to be under the protection of the Seventh Emperor, and you know that the Greys will not intervene on my behalf. My friends, I may need to call upon you at times for refuge. If that's inappropriate, of course, can tell me, and I will not be offended in any way. But I will change the outcome of Delta Sol, and you are going to help me. And we're going to do it the right way, by inspiring others to become conscious and aware of what's going on around them, and use that energy that's created to help rebalance the system of Gaia, of your planet, Delta Sol, Earth. It's going to be glorious. That may sound very silly, but it will be. It will be glorious. Because you will be the ones getting the credit for this. You will be the ones relaying these messages to the world. What I'll be relaying will sound just like random numbers. I appreciate the time you spent listening. My next tape will be from my home, the planet Ibanya. I leave tomorrow. This is Yahweh, over and out.